The first that really seemed to be jumping out to people was the issue of Iran and whether or not the United States is going to go to war with Iran. And I'm going to talk today primarily about larger principles in terms of how one observes politics. So the first thing I would say to you, always, it is a given that the first place you always look when one country attacks another is at the country that's doing the attacking. Because people, at least in the United States, which is the only thing I have any experience with, often make the mistake of seeing countries, especially other countries, as monoliths. And they never, ever, ever are. Even if they are an authoritarian country, even if it seems like one group has all the power, there is always a political contest going on in a country. So whenever you see Russia invade Ukraine, for example, or one country trying to go after another country, it's you have to start with what's going on internally to that country. So that's the first thing I would say when you look at this larger issue here, but also if the United States ends up getting involved somewhere else, as it has done in the past, what is going on internally in that country? Now, I'm not going to talk about Israeli politics, about which I know only as much as anybody on the street does. But that's a really important thing to remember if you think about what's happening right now between Israel and Iran. So let me just give you a little bit of the background, and remember that all of the countries involved have very long histories in the past, and that there are a number of countries, not just Israel and not just the United States, who don't want Iran to develop nuclear weapons capabilities. So that's hanging out there. There's a lot of people who've been trying to stop that from happening for a long time. And if you remember, in 2015, President Barack Obama managed to negotiate what was called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. Just by the way, I have to look up all these acronyms every time too. So if you're like, crap, what is that again? Don't feel like you're not in really good company. They keep throwing acronyms at us all the time. And who knows? But anyway, if you see JCPOA, that's the nuclear deal. That's the Iran deal. You hear about the Iran nuclear deal, and it stands for the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And what that said was that the US, China, France, Germany, Russia, and the United Kingdom would lift economic sanctions that they had against Iran in exchange for limits to Iran's nuclear program. Now, when even at the time that was negotiated, if you remember, there were a number of Republicans in Congress, led actually by Tom Cotton, who was a junior senator at the time, were like, they actually wrote an open letter to Iran saying, don't bother to negotiate with Obama, because the second we get back in power, we're going to tear this deal up. That is, in fact, what happened when Trump was elected and then took office in 2017. In 2018, he pulled the United States out of the JCPOA, out of the Iran nuclear deal. And he said he was going to negotiate a better deal. Now, it's worth remembering that this is kind of an MO of Trump's. He tears something up, and then he basically tries to renegotiate what was already there and then put his own name on it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. More often doesn't than does. But he said, he was going to renegotiate and get a better deal. Well, what he did was he put onto Iran what he called a maximum pressure campaign to get it to agree to another version of a sort of joint comprehensive nuclear deal. And in fact, that didn't work. So now that he is back in power, in February of 2025, he reinstituted the plan of maximum pressure to try and force the Iranians to a deal. But also, that was February. And then in March, his director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, said that the American intelligence community assessed that Iran was not, in fact, close to developing a nuclear weapon. Just hold that out there. Also in March then, Trump sort of changed his tune. He actually said to the Fox News channel that he had sent a letter to the supreme leader in Iran saying that that they should start to negotiate, because nobody, if the US had to come down on them militarily, it wasn't going to end well for them. And the Iranians began by saying, stop it. We're not going to give in to your pressure. But by April, they said, yes, they were willing to talk. Now, again, when I said you got to think about sort of all the different players here, remember that Iran had backed those non-state actors I keep talking about in Lebanon, Yemen, and Hamas in Gaza. And they had been badly, badly hurt, those different non-state actors. Hamas had been hammered since the October 7th, 2023 attack on Israel. Israel had also been hammering Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the US especially had been hitting the Houthis in Yemen. So all of their proxies were significantly weaker. And by April, they suggested that, in fact, they were willing to talk. So discussions began in April, and there have actually been 5 sets of negotiations between the US and Iran taking place in places like Oman. And they haven't agreed to anything, but they're talking, that sort of thing going on. And that's where things stood last week, when there was to be yet another meeting in Oman on Sunday, I think it was the 15th of June. There was supposed to be another meeting when they were going to keep negotiating. The US and Iran and negotiators were supposed to be working on this issue. But in all of this, the United States had largely cut out Israel's Netanyahu. Now, remember, again, Israel's got a number of political parties. Netanyahu has just gone through a vote that looked pretty dicey. There's a lot going on in Israel as well. Again, I'm not going to get into that, but remember, these are not, this is one of the things about politics that is really interesting, but also somewhat maddening, is that it's constantly a moving target. People are changing all the time, and positions are changing all the time. So, it always sort of frustrates me when someone says, well, you believed that 25 years ago. It's like, well, it was a whole different world then. So anyway, Israel had been had been cut out of these discussions. And on June 12th, which was last Thursday, Netanyahu's government struck Iran, hitting nuclear facilities and senior military officials, killing a bunch of them. And this is so this is where the US now I'm turning back to the US, and I hope this is useful. I know it's a lot of moving pieces, but so what happened, if you think about it, that night, I remember because I was writing and I had just written a whole letter, and then that happened, and I'm like, really? Come on. The US Secretary of State, who is Marco Rubio, the former Florida senator, issued a statement in which he said the US had nothing to do with this. Israel acted unilaterally, and Iran should not hit American military personnel. Remember, though, that Rubio is also the acting national security advisor, because remember, the first national security advisor was Brian Waltz, and he's the guy who invited the Atlantic journalist onto the Signal chat where they were planning military strikes on the Houthis in Yemen. And so Trump just said, oh, we're not going to do that again. We'll just get Rubio to cover the national security advisor role as well. So when Rubio came into that particular office, he's acting, by the way, he's not confirmed. When he came into that, he got rid of a lot of people in the National Security Council. So the White House is operating with virtually no, maybe not even virtually no, national security people or military crisis people in this moment. They don't really have anybody. The people that they have got are Rubio, who's filling both of these roles, plus Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who has really no experience at all in this, and Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence. And though they have both been sidelined, according to the Washington Post, and Trump is sort of saying he's going to handle all this on his own. And we know that Trump basically keeps insisting he's the world's best negotiator. He recently said he could have negotiated the way out of the Civil War. But the reality is, if he was a good negotiator and it looked like things were going in a good direction, Netanyahu would not have struck Iran. He didn't strike Iran under Biden, and he didn't do it under Trump the first time when Trump had some adults in the room. Now he feels like he's got the leeway to do that. All right. So Rubio comes out and he says, we had nothing to do with this. However, in the very early days of the strikes, they looked pretty successful. Now, Iran's been striking back with missiles, but at the beginning of the days, it looked like it was a really good, hit, and it was going to be a victory. And all of a sudden, Trump started posting on social media that the U.S. seemed to be involved. He began to take credit for the strike, saying it was American hardware that had done them, and insisting that Iran would make a deal. And then that was Friday. And then on Saturday, of course, were the No Kings protests, which were huge, about 2% of the US population, and at least, and his military parade, which really fizzled, which, by the way, was kind of sad as an American. The idea of showcasing American eras of military was actually pretty cool. They only had 2 months to do it, and it looked like it was his birthday party, and he didn't disabuse anybody of that idea. And I'm just kind of giving a shout out here to the soldiers and sailors who worked on that. Anyway, so that happened Saturday, right? So, and I'm trying to build up a picture here, obviously. But there is an important piece here, and that is that the United States is the only military that has a bomb that can get deep enough underground to actually hit the places where Iran appears to be developing nuclear capabilities, if indeed it is doing so. And so there's pressure on the U.S. to produce the one kind of plane that can carry this bomb, which is 30,000 pounds. It's called a massive ordnance penetrator, to deliver it to Iran. So there's pressure on the U.S. to participate on the side of Israel. All right. So Trump, when he was at the G7 in Canada, kept sort of pressing the idea that maybe the U.S. was going to get involved. And, he keeps saying Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. And then sort of out of the blue, he says, everyone should immediately evacuate Tehran. More than 9 million people live in Tehran, and more than 16 million live in the immediate area. That's a little bit, I think it's a little bit bigger, actually, than the state of Pennsylvania. It's like saying to the state of Pennsylvania, everybody out. I mean, it was just a weird thing to say. And then he left the G7. And when France's Emmanuel Macron said he's gone to negotiate a ceasefire, he kind of exploded on social media and says, no, I'm doing something much bigger than that. He's got it wrong. Stay tuned. And then he started to say, we have control over the air in Iran, and we know exactly where the supreme leader is hiding. We're not going to kill him right now, but we know where he is. Again, suggesting that the U.S. was involved. It certainly seemed as if he kind of wanted a quick win, and it was kind of, I'm going to stamp the Americans on this because it looks like it's going to win. But then it became really clear really quickly. And again, we're talking, this is all happening in a week. This is a week of time. A week ago at this time, if you look back at the tape I did, I wasn't talking about this. But then MAGA, his supporters, split very badly over this, very badly over this, because there are the isolationists who don't want America involved in foreign wars at all. Remember, we've been pulling out of everything right and left because America first, and we're going to be isolated. And that's people like Steve Bannon, for example, and Tucker Carlson, both media people who insist that the U.S. should not be involved anywhere. And on the other hand, in the MAGA movement, you have the evangelicals who believe that Israel is central to the second coming of Jesus Christ before the end days. And they believe that America should always intervene on the side of Israel. And they're represented by people like the American ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, the former Arkansas governor, who messaged Trump, at least Trump put something that purported to be a message from him on Truth Social, basically urging Trump to use missiles, including the potential for nuclear missiles on Iran. It was really kind of an astonishing statement. So MAGA started to split over this, and they're really, really at each other's throats over this. At the same time, Iran started to hit back. And it became clear that this was not going to be a one and done. And yet at the same time, the news has kept the focus entirely on Trump. So one of the things, so Trump loves this. He's center of attention again, and nobody's talking about the parade, and nobody's talking about the No Kings protest. And all of a sudden, the whole world is waiting on Donald Trump again. So he's loving it. But there's really not very much he can do that isn't going to upset somebody and put him in a bad position. So what he has done is he's repeatedly said, I get to decide. I'm the one, you don't know what I'm going to do. I might do it, I might not, and kept the cameras on himself. And yet today he had Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, come out with a statement in which he said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll let you know within the next 2 weeks, which suggests he's probably hoping to kick the can down the road and hope that the problem will go away, because there is no way he can split that baby that is going to keep MAGA together. And as soon as a war breaks out, as soon as America gets involved in a war, he's not going to be the center of attention anymore. The war will be the center of attention. And people aren't going to like it. Americans are very, very, very tired of wars in the Middle East.